Hello everyone, and welcome to today's session. I'm excited to kick things off with our presentation on Mega Goal 2.2. Today, we'll be focusing on Unit 7, which is titled, There is No Place Like Home. We'll be exploring both conversation and listening skills related to this theme. Over the next few minutes, I'll guide you through key concepts and activities designed to enhance your understanding and communication. Let's get started. Today, we're going to focus on some key skills that will help you improve your understanding and communication. First, we'll practice reading a conversation carefully to pick out specific information. This skill is essential for grasping details and context. Next, we'll answer some questions based on that conversation, which helps reinforce your comprehension and critical thinking. Then, we'll work on matching new vocabulary with its correct meaning, expanding your language toolkit. We'll also look at using the real talk in sentences, so you can see how these expressions work in real situations. Throughout this lesson, we'll emphasize stress on two-syllable nouns and verbs. This is important for clear pronunciation and natural speech. Remember, our main goal is to develop skills that are not only about understanding language, but also about using it confidently and accurately. These points connect to the overall theme of becoming more effective communicators in English. So, let's get started and keep these objectives in mind as we go along. Let's start with the basics of how students typically warm up or settle into their living situations. Many students begin by staying in their own apartments, especially if they are studying locally or have their own housing arrangements. Others might stay on campus in dormitories, which are a popular option because of their convenience and the sense of community they offer. Some students live with their families, which can provide a supportive environment and reduce living expenses. But what about students who come from different towns or cities? Where do they usually live when they move to attend college or university? In Saudi Arabia, many students from outside the city or even from other regions choose to stay in university-provided accommodations or rent apartments close to campus. This allows them to focus on their studies without long commutes. Understanding where students live is an important part of our overall theme because it impacts their daily routines, social interactions, and overall university experience. So, whether they're living in apartments, dorms, or with their families, each option plays a role in shaping their educational journey. Let's take a closer look at some of the prominent universities in Saudi Arabia. We have King Faisal University, King Abdul Aziz University, Al-Qura University, King Saud University, Jizan University, Tabuk University, and Princess Noura University. Each of these institutions plays a vital role in higher education across the kingdom. Now, a key point to highlight is which of these universities offer dormitory buildings for their students. Providing dormitories is an important aspect because it supports students who come from different regions, making higher education more accessible and convenient. If you notice, King Saud University, for instance, is known for having dedicated dormitory facilities. This not only helps students focus on their studies, but also fosters a sense of community within the campus. So, when we think about the overall support systems in place at these universities, accommodation options are a significant part of that. This connectivity between university facilities and student life is essential in understanding how these institutions support their students' success. So, in this slide, we have a student sharing their thoughts about where they plan to live when they start college. It's a common concern for many students because choosing between living on campus, in a dorm, or off campus in an apartment can really shape their entire college experience. What's important here is understanding how each option impacts their independence, social life, and daily routines. For example, living in a dorm can be a great way to meet people quickly and get involved on campus, while living off campus might offer more privacy and flexibility. This discussion ties back to the overall theme of the presentation, which is about preparing for the transition to college life. Deciding where to live is a key part of that preparation, influencing everything from daily schedules to social opportunities. Listening to students talk about their choices helps us understand the variety of experiences and considerations involved. reminding us that there's no one-size-fits-all answer. Each student's decision is personal and can shape their college journey in unique ways. Let's take a closer look at this slide. First, we ask, how many persons are there? Well, in this scene, we see 2 people. Next, where do they live? Both are university students, so they live in a university environment, which might influence their daily routines and interactions. We see their names, Ahmed and Hameed. Knowing their names helps us personalize their stories and understand their perspectives better. The slide also points out that there are 2 persons, emphasizing the small, personal nature of this interaction. Now, what are they talking about? The slide doesn't specify the exact topic, but since they are university students, the conversation could be about their studies, campus life, or a shared interest. Finally, the question is, who are they? They are students, likely friends or classmates, engaging in a typical conversation that might reflect common student experiences. Overall, this slide helps us understand the social context of our presentation, illustrating real-life interactions that are central to our theme of communication and social behavior in a university setting. So, when I say the word cool, I want you to think about what it really means. It's a word we often use to describe something that's impressive, stylish, or just generally great. But it's also a bit more than that. It captures a sense of confidence and uniqueness. Now, finding words that mean cool can be interesting because there are many options depending on the context. For example, you might think of words like awesome, fantastic, or amazing. Each of these shares that sense of something being really great or extraordinary. This idea ties into our overall theme of understanding how language shapes perception and how we use words to communicate what we value or admire. Recognizing these synonyms helps us better express ourselves and connect with others by choosing the most fitting words for the situation. So next time you want to describe something as cool, consider what nuance you want to convey, whether it's style, impressiveness, or just a general sense of excellence. Hold on, find the word that means stop for a moment. In this part of the presentation, I want to emphasize the importance of pausing. Sometimes, when we're communicating, taking a moment to stop can really help clarify our message. It allows the listener to process what's been said so far, and it gives us a chance to gather our thoughts before moving on. So remember, using a pause strategically can make your communication more effective. It's a simple but powerful tool in conveying your ideas clearly and confidently. So when we say out of touch, we're talking about finding a word that essentially means not realistic. It's about describing situations or ideas that don't quite align with what's actually achievable or practical. You might think of words like unrealistic, impractical, or even idealistic, though each has a slightly different nuance. The key point here is to understand how these words reflect a disconnect from what's feasible. Recognizing this helps us see when goals or expectations might be out of reach, which ties back to our overall theme of effective planning and setting achievable targets. It's important to stay grounded in reality to make meaningful progress. Let's look at this slide and focus on the word grand. Now, grand is a term often used to describe 1,000, especially in financial contexts. For example, when someone says a grand, they're referring to $1,000. It's a quick, informal way to talk about large sums of money without saying the full number. This is important because understanding these colloquial terms helps us better interpret conversations, reports, and data where such language is common. So, in summary, grand is a key term that represents 1,000, making it easier to communicate about sizable amounts efficiently. This ties into our overall theme of understanding how language shapes our perception of scale and value. All right, so today we're looking at some common idioms related to money. First up, we have megabucks. This phrase is used to describe a very large amount of money. Think of it as a fun, informal way to say someone is dealing with a ton of cash. It's often used when talking about huge earnings or expenses. Next, we have the phrase an arm and leg. Now, this one might sound a bit strange at first, but it means something that costs a lot of money, more than you'd expect or want to pay. When someone says something costs an arm and a leg, they're emphasizing that it's very expensive. So to connect these concepts, both megabucks and an arm and leg deal with amounts of money, but in different ways. One highlights a large sum, and the other emphasizes a high cost. Understanding these idioms can really help us communicate more naturally about money in everyday conversations. Ahmed, who says we can't challenge the status quo. Sometimes, we need to ask ourselves who really controls the narrative. Grand ambitions often lead us to think big, but are those ambitions grounded in reality? That's where the idea of megabucks comes in. Big dreams, big money, but at what cost? Reality check is essential. We have to stay honest with ourselves about where we stand and what's achievable. It's about balancing aspiration with practicality. Out of touch, yeah, that can happen if we lose sight of the ground realities. It's a reminder to stay connected to the core of our goals and the people we serve. Hold on, sometimes, we just need to pause, reassess, and make sure we're on the right track. Patience and reflection are key. And finally, cool. Staying calm and composed, even when things get intense, helps us navigate challenges with clarity and confidence. So this slide really ties into our overall theme: questioning assumptions, staying grounded, and maintaining perspective as we move forward. Ahmed is the one who uses all of these expressions. Let's take a moment to read through the words and their meanings. This slide highlights how Ahmed incorporates these expressions into his communication. Understanding these phrases is important because they help us see how language can be used effectively in different situations. When Ahmed uses these expressions, it shows his ability to connect with others and convey his message clearly. So, as we go through this, keep in mind how these expressions serve as tools for better interaction. They are key to making our conversations more engaging and meaningful. Remember, mastering such expressions can really enhance our overall communication skills. Now, let's look at each of these expressions more closely and see how Ahmed uses them in context. So what did she actually say? Well, the phrase cool, really cool. Everything's cool here might sound simple, but it's packed with meaning. It emphasizes a sense of calm and control, even when things might be complex or uncertain. Then we see the repetition: cool, totally cool, everything's cool here, which reinforces this feeling of confidence and reassurance. And notice the slight variation in the last line: cool, totally cool, everything's cool there. It shifts the focus, suggesting that this calmness isn't just local but extends to other areas or teams. Overall, these phrases highlight the importance of maintaining composure and clarity in communication, especially when conveying stability or confidence. It's a great reminder that how we say things can influence perceptions, and in our overall theme, it's about projecting assurance even when the situation might be anything but simple. All right, let's take a look at this slide titled, "What did he say?" Now, you might have heard phrases like "okay, hold on," "okay, held on," or "okay, hang on." These are common ways we pause during conversations or discussions. But what's really important here is understanding the context in which people use these expressions. They often signal that someone needs a moment to process information, gather their thoughts, or clarify what was just said. In terms of communication, these phrases can also indicate that we're trying to keep a conversation flowing smoothly, especially when there's a moment of uncertainty or when we're seeking confirmation. Recognizing these cues helps us better interpret the speaker's intent and ensures we're engaged and responsive. So, in the bigger picture of effective communication, understanding these small but significant phrases allows us to build rapport, show attentiveness, and foster clearer exchanges. They may seem simple, but they play a key role in making conversations more natural and productive. So, what did he say? Well, he was talking about the cost of air conditioners, and he used a couple of common idioms to illustrate just how expensive they can be. The first phrase was "air conditioners cost arm and leg," which is a way of saying they are really pricey. Then he flipped it around with "a leg and an arm." just to show how interchangeable these idioms are, even though they mean the same thing. And finally, he said, air conditioners cost an arm and a leg, emphasizing that these expenses can add up quickly. These expressions are interesting because they highlight how we often describe high costs in a vivid, memorable way. It ties into our overall theme about consumer expenses and the importance of understanding how language shapes our perception of value. So, whether you're talking about appliances or any big purchase, these idioms remind us that some things really do come with a hefty price tag. So, what did he actually say? Well, it's interesting because he mentioned 3 different things that sound similar but are quite distinct. First, he talked about megabucks, which generally refers to huge amounts of money. That's often used when discussing big profits or investments. Then, he said megabooks, which might sound like books on a massive scale, perhaps referring to large datasets or extensive collections. Finally, he mentioned megabox, which could be related to a brand or company name, maybe a media or entertainment platform. The key here is to understand how each of these terms connects to our overall theme, whether it's about financial growth, information management, or branding strategies. Recognizing the differences helps us see how language can be playful yet precise, and how context is crucial in interpreting what's being communicated. So when he says these, he's emphasizing different aspects, money, information, and brands, that are all relevant in our broader discussion of market expansion and innovation. So I was really considering a large, modern apartment off campus. I wanted something with an extra bedroom, parking, and a washer and dryer included, basically the ideal setup for me. But the reality is, I just couldn't afford an apartment like that on my current budget. It was a bit of a wake-up call, honestly. So after thinking it through, I decided it's best to stay at home for another year. This way, I can save more money and be better prepared for the future. This decision ties into the overall theme of planning wisely and making practical choices to set myself up for success. When we're introducing what we're looking for or seeking, it's important to use clear and effective phrases. These phrases help set the tone and guide the conversation or presentation. They serve as signals to your audience about your intentions or goals. By using these expressions, you make it easier for others to understand what you need from them or what you're aiming to achieve. This is especially crucial in collaborative environments where clarity is key. Remember, the way you frame your inquiry can influence the response you get, so choosing the right words matters. Incorporating these phrases into your communication helps create a more engaging and productive dialogue, aligning everyone with your overall objectives. So on this slide, we're focusing on an interesting aspect of the conversation, the specific expression Hameed uses. Now, understanding the particular phrases or words someone chooses can give us deeper insight into their attitude or feelings. It's not just about what he says, but how he says it. This can reveal things like his level of confidence, politeness, or even underlying emotions. Recognizing these expressions helps us better interpret the overall tone of the conversation and Hameed's intentions. Ultimately, paying attention to these details connects back to our broader theme of effective communication, showing us how language choice influences understanding. This slide doesn't contain enough information. That's why we're moving to the next slide. Let's take a moment to reflect on the key points here. First, the letter D might seem simple, but it reminds us of the importance of foundational elements in our overall strategy. Next, E emphasizes the need for effective execution. Without action, even the best plans stay on paper. Moving on to A, which highlights agility. Being adaptable allows us to navigate changes smoothly. Then, B stands for building strong relationships because collaboration truly drives success. Lastly, C reminds us to communicate clearly, ensuring everyone is aligned and working toward the same goals. Together, these concepts form a cohesive framework that supports our broader objectives. They reinforce the idea that success isn't just about individual parts, but how well we integrate and execute them as a whole. This slide encapsulates the core principles that underpin everything we've discussed so far, tying it all back to our overarching theme of strategic growth and continuous improvement. All right, for this final slide, I want to emphasize the importance of completing the workbook, specifically page 298, Exercise I. This is our homework, and it's designed to reinforce what we've covered today. Engaging with these exercises helps solidify your understanding and makes the concepts stick. Remember, consistent practice is key to mastery, so I encourage you to take the time to work through this exercise thoroughly. Think of it as an opportunity to apply what you've learned in a practical way. This not only supports your learning journey, but also connects back to the overall theme of developing your skills and confidence. So, make sure to set aside some time to do this homework. You'll thank yourself later.